Dara Ellison was 36 years old and 18 hours away from becoming someone's wife when she let herself into the house she had spent 4 years building a life inside of, and heard the shower running in a room she had not been told anyone was using. She had come home early because the rehearsal dinner had run long and her feet hurt, and because she had spent the last 2 hours performing the particular joy that bridal tradition required, and she was tired of performing it. She had said her good nights to the table, her mother, her aunts, the women from her office, the friends who had flown in from 3 different cities, and she had driven home in the car she had bought herself. Through the streets of Nashville she had navigated for 11 years, to the house on Garfield Lane where the wedding centerpieces were stacked in the dining room and the dress was hanging in the closet, and the future was arranged on every surface like something waiting to be claimed. She had her key. She had let herself in through the side door the way she always did, because the side door was closer to where she parked, and because it was her house. She had bought it. Her name was the only name on the deed. That was the first thing she would think about later, when she was trying to account for all of the ways she had not been paying attention. She had bought the house, and he had moved into it, and she had never thought carefully about what that arrangement said about how each of them understood the weight of things. She heard the shower. She heard something else. She stood in the hallway for 3 seconds that were the longest 3 seconds of her adult life, and then she understood what she was hearing. And she did not move for another moment after that, not from indecision, but from the precision of someone absorbing information they need to be certain about before they act on it. She was certain what Dara's fiancé did not know, what her best friend did not know, what almost everyone in her life had found comfortable not knowing, was that Dara Ellison was not simply the soft-spoken accountant at the regional architecture firm where she had worked for 8 years. She was the accountant who had spent those 8 years quietly acquiring a 40% equity stake in that firm through a structure her mentor, a man named Gerald, her father's oldest friend, the one who had stepped into the role her father could not fill after her father's death when Dara was 27, had helped her build from the ground up. She was the woman who had already, 3 weeks before this night, signed the papers that would make her a named founding partner when the firm's restructuring finalized in January. She had planned to tell Dax after the honeymoon. She had planned a lot of things. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house on Garfield Lane had 3 bedrooms and a kitchen she had gutted herself with a contractor she trusted, and a backyard garden that she had planted in phases over 4 springs, starting from bare dirt and ending in something that the neighbor 2 doors down had once stopped her on the sidewalk specifically to compliment. The garden was the thing she was most proud of in the physical world, which was saying something, because she was also proud of the deck she had designed with Gerald's input, and proud of the built-in shelving in the second bedroom that she had painted the particular shade of blue-green that had taken her 6 sample rounds to arrive at. Dax had moved in 2 years ago, 19 months after they met at a mutual friend's cookout in East Nashville on a Saturday afternoon in May that she remembered as being hotter than it should have been for the time of year. He had been easy to be around, which was the quality she had valued most after a decade of relationships that required more management than they returned. He laughed at the right moments. He remembered the things she told him. He helped without being asked, with the deck project, with the garden's second phase, with the move in that she had supervised with the same organized efficiency she brought to everything she did. Gerald had met him twice. He had been polite about it in the way that Gerald was polite about things he was reserving judgment on, which was the same way her father had been polite about things, and which was a thing she had noticed and filed and chosen not to examine too carefully because she was happy, and because sometimes you chose not to examine what you did not yet want to know. Her best friend's name was Camille. They had been close since their first year at Tennessee State. Two women who had recognized something in each other across a dormitory common room in September of the year. They were both 18 and had not stopped talking since. Camille was the maid of honor. She had given a toast at the rehearsal dinner 2 hours ago that made 3 people at the table cry. She had been staying in the house for the past 4 days, in the 3rd bedroom, because she had flown in from Houston, and because Dara had wanted her close in the days before the wedding. She had wanted her close. She had trusted her that completely. Camille was supposed to be at the hotel bar with the bridesmaids. Dax was supposed to be at his brother's apartment across town for the bachelor night they had planned. Dara was supposed to be arriving home to a quiet house, to her dress in the closet and the centerpieces on the table, and the particular stillness of a night before a morning that was meant to change everything. Some things change in different directions than you plan. She stood in the hallway and she made a decision, and it took less time than the decision should have taken, which told her something she had already known about herself, that when the information was sufficient, she did not hesitate. She walked to the kitchen. She sat at the table she had bought at an estate sale in Germantown and refinished herself over a long weekend in 2021. She placed her bag on the table, and she opened it, and she took out her phone, and she sat with it for a moment. Her hands didn't shake. They had not shaken since her father's funeral, and that was the last time she had allowed anything to surprise her badly enough to produce trembling. Since then, she had operated on the principle that surprise was mostly a failure of preparation, and that the remedy for surprise was to prepare more thoroughly for every outcome. She had not prepared for this one. She was noting that. She was not going to make that mistake again. She called Gerald. Gerald answered on the 3rd ring, which meant he was still awake, which was not surprising, because Gerald had never in the 36 years she had known him gone to bed before midnight. He said her name as a question. She told him what she had heard. She told him where she was sitting. She told him that she needed him to tell her the 3 things she needed to know immediately, because Gerald always knew what the 3 things were. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "First, do not move out of that house tonight, not for any reason. Second, call the attorney in the morning, first thing, and tell her what happened, and ask her to advise you on any documentation that protects the equity position before it gets complicated. Third, don't talk to either of them tonight." She said I wasn't going to. He said, "I know. I'm saying it so you have it in your ear instead of just in your head." She said, "Gerald." He said, "I'm coming." He lived 22 minutes away in Brentwood, and he was at her kitchen table in 24 minutes, still in his reading clothes. And he sat across from her, and they drank decaf coffee, the only kind she kept in the house. And he talked to her the way he had talked to her since she was 27 years old, and suddenly, without a father, in the direct and affectionate language of a man who understood that the people he loved needed honesty more than comfort, but could receive both at the same time. He had known her father for 30 years. He had known her since she was 4. He had watched her build everything she had built with the proprietary attention of someone who had helped lay the early foundations, and there was nothing she had ever brought to this table, or any table in any room they had ever shared, that had made him look at her as though she were less than what she was. He said, "The equity structure protects you regardless. Nothing that happens tonight changes January." She knew that. She needed to hear it from him because she needed to hear it out loud in the room with her. He said, "The house is yours. The deed is yours. The garden is yours. The dress you can do whatever you want with." He said the last part without irony, which was the only way it could have landed correctly, and it did. She said, The dress stays in the closet until I decide." He nodded. He understood that some decisions had their own timing. He said, "Do you know how long?" She thought about it honestly. She thought about the moments she had filed without examining. The evening 2 months ago when Camille had come to town briefly for what she said was a work trip, and had met Dax for lunch without mentioning it to Dara until Dara asked how the lunch had gone. Which was not itself a problem, except that Dara had not known about the lunch until that moment. Had not been invited, had been edited out of a conversation between two people she trusted. She thought about the evenings when Dax had stepped outside to take a call and come back in with the particular expression of a man who had just shifted registers. She thought about a handful of moments she had put in a drawer without looking at them because she was busy and because she was happy, and because sometimes the drawer is the choice you make before you're ready to make the other one. She said, "I think I've known something for a while. I just didn't know what." Gerald said, "That's usually how it works." She said, "I need to know what Patricia needs from me in the morning." Gerald said, "She'll tell you. Patricia is thorough. You chose her for that reason." She had. She had chosen every person in her professional life for a specific quality they possessed. The way she had chosen every piece of furniture and every plant and every contractor. Not impulsively. Not for appearances, for function, and for longevity, and because she was an accountant, and accountants understood that the most important decisions were almost never the dramatic ones, but the structural ones. The ones made quietly in advance of the moment when they would need to hold weight. She thought, "I built this house. I built this firm. I built every reliable thing in my life with care and patience, and I chose this man the same way, and I was wrong about him, and I will be more careful next time, and I will not waste the wrong by pretending it didn't happen, or by letting it be larger than it was." She was angry. She acknowledged it, measured it, and set it aside. Not because anger was illegitimate, but because anger was not the tool for what came next. What came next required clarity, and she had always been better at clarity than at anything else. Gerald stayed until 2 in the morning. At 2, he said he was going to sleep in the chair in the second bedroom. There was a reading chair in there she had never had the heart to replace, because it had been her father's, deep brown leather, worn soft at the arms. The kind of chair that held the shape of the person who had used it most, and that he would be there in the morning. She went to her bedroom. The dress was still in the closet. She looked at it for a moment, and then she turned off the light, and she lay down on her own bed in her own house, and she looked at the ceiling, and she thought about everything she was going to do, and in what order. She was an accountant. She thought in sequences. Sequences were how you arrived at correct outcomes. In the morning, at 7, she heard Camille moving in the hallway. She heard her stop outside the bedroom door, the particular pause of a person deciding whether to knock on a door they are not certain they have the right to knock on anymore. She said, through the door, in a voice that was entirely even, "The wedding is canceled. I need you out of this house by 9. There was a silence on the other side of the door that told her everything she had not already known. Then Camille said her name, said it the way she had said it for 18 years, with the specific inflection of a person who had used it so often it had become an instrument. Dara said, 9 o'clock, Camille. She heard her move away down the hall. She heard the third bedroom door close with a softness that was itself a kind of communication. She lay still for another 30 seconds. Then she got up. She moved with the efficiency she always moved with when she had a sequence to execute, and the sequence was clear. She called the venue at 7:15. The coordinator answered with the bright professional warmth of someone who believed she was receiving a confirmation call and adjusted in real time when she understood what she was actually receiving. She was gracious about it. Dara thanked her and moved on. She called the caterer at 7:20, the florist at 7:26, the photographer at 7:31, who was generous and kind and said she was sorry, and Dara said she appreciated that and got off the phone. Each call took less time than the one before it, because she was moving through the sequence with the focused clarity of someone who has already grieved the version of the day she had planned and is now simply managing the logistics of the version that actually happened. She called her mother at 7:30, and her mother, who had raised Dara Ellison and therefore understood who she was dealing with, asked only 3 questions and did not cry until she got off the phone. Dara knew this because her mother called back 4 minutes later with a steadier voice and said, "Tell me what you need me to do." And that was the version of love Dara had always been most grateful for. Love that asked what was needed and then provided it. Without theater and without hesitation. Her mother said she would handle the family calls. Dara said thank you. She meant it completely. She called Patricia at 8. Patricia listened to what had happened without interrupting and was quiet for a moment at the end of it. And Dara had the sense of someone rapidly reorganizing a professional understanding of a situation. Then Patricia said, with the clean efficiency of someone shifting into the necessary mode, the equity position is not affected. What we need to address is the cohabitation arrangement, given that he is on no ownership documents, but has been a legal resident for 2 years. She paused. Tennessee's treatment of this is specific. I want to have a letter drafted today that formalizes the termination of the cohabitation and establishes the timeline clearly before there is any ambiguity about what the arrangement was or how it ended. Dara said, "What do I need to do on my end?" Patricia said, "Document everything in the house that belongs to you. Photographs. Not just a list, because photographs carry a date stamp. If he has keys, change the locks today. Do not allow him back into the house without a third party present. I'll have the letter ready by noon, and I'll contact his attorney of record directly once you confirm who that is." Dara said, "He doesn't have an attorney yet." Patricia said, "He will by this afternoon." "That's fine. It's actually better. It means the letter goes to someone who will advise him correctly about what he is and is not in a position to contest." She was changing the locks at 10:30, standing on the front porch of her own house with the locksmith working the deadbolt behind her, when Dax's car pulled into the driveway. He came up the front walk with the expression of a man who had rehearsed the version of this conversation where he was still able to shape the outcome. She was standing on the porch with the locksmith behind her finishing the deadbolt, and she watched Dax register the locksmith and recalibrate. He was good at recalibrating. She had always admired it, and now she understood it differently. He said, "Dara, I need to explain," she said. "Patricia Osei will be in contact today with documentation about the cohabitation termination. You have until Friday to remove your belongings. Gerald will be here when you do. Please do not contact me directly." He said, "You're not even going to talk to me?" She said, "I came home early last night. I heard everything I needed to hear." He started with the language of a man reaching for mercy, the particular cadences of someone who understood that the explanation might not save the situation, but believed the explanation was still owed. He said her name twice. He said it had been a mistake. He said that nothing was what she thought it was. She said, "I'm not angry, Dax. I want you to understand that. I spent last night getting clear instead of getting angry, because anger is expensive and I have always been careful with my resources." She paused. "What I found in that house last night was information. I have processed it. Patricia will be in touch." She went back inside. The locksmith handed her the new keys. She thanked him and paid him and closed the door. Gerald was in the kitchen. He had made the decaf and was sitting at the table she had refinished herself, and he looked at her when she came in the way he had looked at her the morning after her father's funeral, not with pity, but with the specific attention of a man who was present and was not going anywhere. She sat across from him. She picked up the coffee. She thought about the equity papers on her desk in the second bedroom. She thought about January. She thought about the garden in the backyard that she had planted in 4 phases over 4 springs, and that would come back in March without anyone's permission. Because that was what she had built. Something that came back on its own. Real power operated in quiet rooms. This kitchen was a quiet room. 11 months later, Dara was a named founding partner at what was now called Ellison Carver Architecture, a firm whose restructured equity valued her stake at a number that would have startled the people at that rehearsal dinner table if they had known it, and most of them had not, because Dara had never seen the value in announcing what she had not yet finished building. The announcement came in January with a press release that the firm's communications director drafted and that Dara approved after removing 2 adjectives she considered unnecessary. And it ran in 3 industry publications and in the Nashville Business Journal on a Thursday morning, and by Thursday afternoon she had 17 messages from colleagues and clients, and 2 from people she barely knew. And she read all of them and responded to the ones that warranted a response and set the rest aside. She had moved through the spring with the organized efficiency of a woman who had processed a disaster and declined to let it define the calendar. She had removed the wedding-related deposits where they were returnable, which was most of them, because she had chosen vendors who operated professionally and who treated the situation with the practical kindness it deserved. The dress she had donated in March to a nonprofit organization in East Nashville that provided formal wear to women rebuilding their lives, a decision that she had made without ceremony and that had felt, when she made it, like exactly the right use of something that no longer had a use. She had sat across from Patricia 3 more times in the first 2 months to finalize the cohabitation documentation, which Dax had signed without dispute. His attorney, as Patricia had predicted, had reviewed the equity architecture and advised his client clearly, and Dax had signed on a Tuesday morning in February, and that was the end of that sequence. He had moved to Memphis by March. She heard this through the mutual friend whose cookout had introduced them, relayed in the specific tone of someone managing competing loyalties by reporting facts without interpretation. She noted it. She moved on. Camille had sent a letter in February. It was 4 pages, handwritten, the kind of letter a person writes when they have decided that the volume of what they owe cannot be contained in a shorter format. Dara read it once, all the way through. Because she believed that things written in full deserved to be received in full, and she had placed it in a drawer in the second bedroom and she had not responded. Not because she lacked words, but because she had determined that some doors, once they had served their purpose, did not require a closing statement. They simply closed. Gerald still came to dinner on the second Sunday of every month, the same schedule they had kept since the year her father died, and she cooked the same meal her father had always requested. Chicken and rice and the cornbread from the recipe her grandmother had written on an index card that lived in a ceramic box on the kitchen counter. And they talked about the firm, and about Gerald's grandchildren, and about the garden, which had come back in March exactly as she had known it would, and which was, by June, the best it had ever been. Partly because she had given it an extra phase of attention in April that she had not planned to give it, working in the dirt on weekend mornings in the particular focused silence of someone who needed to put their hands into something real. There was a man named Solomon who had come into her life in the summer through a professional introduction at a firm retreat in Chattanooga. He was a project manager with an unhurried way of speaking and a quality of attention that felt earned rather than performed, the kind of attention that was not a strategy, but a habit built up over years of genuinely caring about the things in front of him. He had asked her, at their second dinner, what she was most proud of having built, and she had taken a moment to think about it honestly rather than reaching for the professional answer, and she had said, "The garden." He had asked her to describe it. She had described it for several minutes, the phases, the bare dirt at the start, the fence line that had taken 3 springs to fill in the way she had imagined it from the beginning. He had listened without interrupting. She had thought, this is a good sign about a person. A person who can listen to someone describe their garden for several minutes without looking for the exit is a person who is paying attention to the right things. On a Saturday morning in October, she was in the backyard with coffee. The dahlias in the final week of their season. The beds rich and full along the fence line she had planted bare so many years ago. The morning was clear. The house behind her was hers, every room, every surface, every decision that had made it what it was. She had a partners meeting at 9 Monday morning and a contractor consultation at 11, and a life that fit precisely around what she had built and was still building. She pressed the coffee mug between both palms and looked at the garden. Some things, she thought, came back on their own, because you had built them correctly and given them the right ground and trusted the work to do what the work was designed to do. She was free. She was solvent. She was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.